She looks at me every day. Mary Jane Watson. Oh boy. If only she knew how I felt about her. But she can never know. I once chose to live a life of responsibility. A life she can never be a part of. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man, given a job to do. And I'm also Peter Parker. And I too have a job. Parker, stop! No, stop! Parker, late man, always late! God, I love this movie. Spider-Man 2 is directed by Sam Raimi and once again stars Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, James Franco as Harry Osborn, as well as introducing us to the legendary Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus. Right from the get-go, this film is a massive step up from the first film, which is crazy because I love the first film. But there's just something about Spider-Man 2 where it starts and you feel the difference. From the cinematography, to the action, to the costuming, to the set design, to the storytelling, it's all just perfect. In many ways, this is the perfect sequel. Sam Raimi took everything that worked with the first film and then elevated it all to the next level. I mean, let's just take the pizza scene at the opening of the film. To me, that gives the film such a momentum. It opens with a bang, and to me, that's what lays the foundation to the great story that is Spider-Man 2. It's so energetic and funny, it's an amazing set piece, and just the memes. The glorious Raimi memes.
Pizza time.
In many ways, Spider-Man 2 is the best Spider-Man film. And I'm kind of biased when I say that, seeing as how this film pretty much adapts my favorite Spider-Man story, Spider-Man No More from Amazing Spider-Man issue 50. Like, the way Sam Raimi takes that comic, turns that story into a feature-length film, and not only that, he adds to the story, making it even better. Just, it's wonderful, and just, I love it. I love this movie. I mean, how can I not? He adapted my favorite Spider-Man story. The story of Peter Parker's double life essentially pulling him apart, so he quits, only to realize that he is needed as Spider-Man, and so purposefully chooses to sacrifice his social life in order to do what is right. I mean, it's just a wonderful story. And not only that, Sam Raimi takes that story and elevates it to another level by adding onto things, which just turns it into an even stronger story. I mean, Raimi doubles down on making Peter's life so shitty. Every tiny thing, every lateness, every absence, every firing, it all builds up to Peter's one bad day where he sees the love of his life getting engaged to another man. The stress and heartache that comes from all that is wonderfully represented in Peter losing his powers, which is again taken from the Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1. And I honestly love how Sam Raimi sets this all up in one line when Otto tells Peter,
"If you keep something as complicated as love stored up inside, it's gonna make you sick."
I mean, I won't lie, I used to have an issue with Peter losing his powers in this film just because it just seemed like, oh, it's a metaphor for the sake of having it being a metaphor. But as the years go by and the more I grow up and the more this film ages, the more I just start to appreciate the metaphor. I mean, does it make any literal sense? No. But I still appreciate the metaphor regardless of that because it comes from an emotional and heartfelt place, so I don't mind it. But again, him losing his power just adds on to the richness of his story. When he's in the alleyway and he tries to climb up the wall again, a scene in the first film that was meant to be a moment of excitement, of enjoyment, is now just highlighting the fall of Spider-Man. He literally falls down the wall. The visual metaphors are amazing. And it all just culminates into the dream sequence in the car with Peter and Uncle Ben and that flashback memory dream sequence thing. I mean, that scene is a little weird. I think it's just meant to be an internal representation of Peter's internal conflict. But either way, it doesn't really matter. Tobey Maguire's performance, Cliff Robertson's performance, the dialogue. No, Uncle Ben. I'm just Peter Parker. I'm Spider-Man. No more. God, I love this movie! And then Sam Raimi just does the best thing ever. Him and Bill Pope are mad geniuses by taking that splash page from the comic, putting it on the big screen of the Spider-Man suit in the trash can. Just, God, Bill Pope, Sam Raimi, I love you guys. And then what's even mad is that it's immediately followed by the raindrops keep falling on my head montage, which is so corny, so goofy, it shouldn't work, it should break the film's tonal consistency, but it doesn't. It is amazing. But I honestly just love Peter Parker's arc in this film, especially his resolution when he realizes that he is needed as Spider-Man. He goes into the fire and saves the little girl, and then he realizes that other people died, and he's just staring out the windows being like, what am I supposed to do? Am I not supposed to have what I want, what I need? Like, the lines are so powerful. And then there's the scene with Peter and Aunt May where Aunt May gives him the speech about heroes and sacrifice, and how sometimes to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the things we want the most. I mean, it's just so thematically rich. I mean, it's just a wonderful scene, especially since it happens a couple of scenes after Peter tells Aunt May that he was there the night Uncle Ben dies, and he tells her the truth, which that scene in itself is heartbreaking. When Aunt May pulls her hand away, just, Oh no. Oh, it's so uncomfortable, but like in a good way. And honestly, Rosemary Harris is just amazing as Aunt May. She is perfect. And then of course you've got the train fight, which then all leads into the big fight. And honestly, the final fight in the film, it's weird watching it this time around. It feels so intimate. Like, yes, it's big scale in the sense of, oh no, big fusion sun machine that will destroy the city. But when you actually look at it in terms of the way the scene is constructed, it's just three characters. There's Peter, Doc Ock, and Mary Jane, and they're just fighting. It feels so small and intimate. Like, this isn't like the final fight in The Avengers or Man of Steel, where like buildings are blowing up and it's crazy and it's a big spectacle. It's just Spider-Man punching Doc Ock, trying to stop the fusion machine. Like, it feels so character-driven and intimate. Like, it's really refreshing. Like, I remember people going, oh my god, the Spider-Man films are so large scale, why is it always a city-destroying event? Looking at it now, it looks so much smaller in the grand scheme of things. You compare the final fight in this film to the ones we get today, and it feels tiny in comparison to all that. But the thing I love most at the very end is that Peter Parker finally is rewarded for his selflessness. He's finally able to be with Mary Jane, the woman he loves, and he no longer has to hide from her. All the secrets are out in the open, and there's a sense of trust between the two of them. And then of course he has a siren, he puts on the Spider-Man suit, he swings off into the sunset as she watches. It's a wonderful ending. It's a perfect ending to the film.
Go get him, Tiger.
Now getting onto the cast. Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker / Spider-Man is still really good. For the most part, my opinion on his interpretation of Peter Parker / Spider-Man hasn't really changed. Like, I still like him, but all the problems I have with him in the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film, like the fact that he feels a bit too much like a victim at times, or he doesn't really have that much of a backbone, again, that is still an issue I have with him in Spider-Man 2, but in terms of his Spider-Man persona, I really like him in this film. His line delivery on the quips are much better and they feel much more organic. They're not as awkward and as stilted as they are in Spider-Man 1. I do have one tiny little nitpick, and that's after he saves Aunt May and he's like, oh, we sure showed him, and she's like, what do you mean we? And he awkwardly just goes, oh, and then swings off. I don't know, it's weird. Again, comic book Spider-Man would say something more quippy and more smart and then swing off instead of just going, oh, and then swing away. But honestly, other than that, I really love Tobey in this film. I think he's really great. His comedic timing is also just much better. Like, scenes where he's like, I'm back! I'm back! And then, like, he obviously hurts his back and it's like, ow, my back! My back! Like, it's great. I honestly think Tobey Maguire is really good in this movie. Also, this is actually his best Peter Parker hairstyle, which he adopts again in Spider-Man 3. Like, for some odd reason, I just don't like his hair in Spider-Man 1. It's, like, too short and, like, weird looking. I don't know, it's not as stylish. In this film, that sort of off-center Leonardo DiCaprio part he's got, it looks really nice and it really suits him. But now we're gonna get onto Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson.
Oh boy, yeah.
This is the film where I start having problems with Mary Jane because, again, I've seen all the positive arguments about her on the internet, about how Mary Jane in Spider-Man 2 is a good character, and I can see where they're coming from, but the way she acts in this movie at times feels very manipulative or very inconsistent. The romance or not romance between her and Peter is just weird. Like, she acts like Peter is her best friend, but then she also acts like she's in love with him. And then there's that weird scene after Peter's birthday party at the beginning where they're like talking to each other, and she's very much flirting with him. She's very much trying to get him to confess, oh, you're Spider-Man, aren't you? And then there's that bit where she's just like, oh, I'm seeing someone. So this moment where they're connecting and there's a bit of a flirtatious sexual tension gets immediately diminished and feels very wrong because it's like, oh, so she's like messing with Peter's feelings, but also, is she also like stringing along Jonah Jameson?
What? Happy birthday. I'm seeing somebody now.
And she just does this continually throughout the film, like when she sees Peter's empty seat, and she's like really excited to, you know, possibly see him there, and then he isn't, and she gets disappointed, and then the next time they meet, she's like super bitter and angry towards him. I'm like, woman, do you love him or do you not? And then of course she gets engaged to Jonah Jameson, and again, you don't really feel like she is in love with that man. And then it just gets even weirder when Peter stops being Spider-Man and he's trying to pursue Mary Jane again, and he has that conversation where he's like, Mary Jane, you know, I'm not an empty seat anymore. Like, we can pick up where we left off. And it's like, Peter, you can't do that. She's engaged now. But then also, she's doing that thing where, Peter, I'm engaged now, stop it. But then also, her reaction of seeing Peter in the crowd in that performance was bizarre. Like, she was like genuinely like starstruck. She was like, oh my god, he's here. Like, she is in love with him. And then, of course, throughout the whole movie, she's trying to figure out what is Peter's problem. And then it's weird because you look at the end of the last film and she realizes, oh, I think Peter's Spider-Man. And for the most part in this film, it seems like that's what she's trying to do. And then you get to the scene in the cafe where she's just like, do you love me? And he's just like, oh, I don't. And then she's like, kiss me, so she can prove her theory that he's Spider-Man. And then, of course, you get to the end, and she finds out he's Spider-Man, and she's like, oh, I think I always knew, and all that kind of stuff. And just, again, it feels really weird to me. On the one hand, I like their relationship purely because I'm on Peter's side. I want Peter to win. I want Peter to get the girl. And at the end of the film, he does. But, on the other hand, I just don't like the way Kirsten Dunst plays Mary Jane. She plays her as really manipulative and unlikable. And again, the scene just before she gets engaged and Peter starts talking to her, and he does the most dorkiest thing in reading poetry to her. Like, I get the sentiment Raimi was going for. I get that it's Peter trying to take Otto's advice and trying to win Mary Jane over, but just, again, he looks so out of touch and like a weirdo.
Day by day, he gazed upon her. Day by day, he sighed with passion. Day by day.
Don't start.
But also, Mary Jane's attitude towards Peter in that scene, like, if I'm Peter, I'd be very much turned off. Like, she has this look of just like, oh, you, like, excuse me, I thought I was your best friend, why are you treating me like that? Like, yes, I know Peter said he was going to show up to the play on time, but if I'm in his position, I would be fighting back a bit more. Like, again, Tobey Maguire's Peter feels too passive for his own good. He feels very much like a pushover. Common book Peter Parker would be like, no, hey, look, listen, I tried to get there. I wanted to be there. There was something that came up. My bike got run. He had a valid excuse. His bike got ran over. But yeah, that's my biggest problem with Mary Jane in this film. And it gets even worse in Spider-Man 3. I understand the romantic angle Raimi's going for. And in many ways, the Peter Mary Jane romance is played like a very Hollywood romance in a way. Like, it's meant to be all these platitudes and, you know, theatrical lines of dialogue and all that stuff. But again, there's just moments where they don't act like real people and it just feels wrong. But then you're also really satisfied when they get together at the end, so I don't know. It's a very complicated relationship I have with their relationship. Anyways, moving on from that, James Franco as Harry Osborn is really good. I actually really like Harry Osborn in this film. I like his small arc of him turning more villainous and by the end discovering that his dad was the Green Goblin, and also finding out that Peter is Spider-Man. But again, tiny little nitpick is that Peter could easily have been like, no, Harry, I didn't kill your father. There's no time to explain, but I will explain it to you at some point. But either way, I like James Franco's performance in this film. Nobel Prize. I'll see you in Sweden. And also, seeing as how I mentioned Tobey Maguire's hair, James Franco's hair is really good in this film. I really like his hairstyle, like the brown curls, like, for some reason, it looks really cool. Anyways, moving on, Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus is wonderful.
Oh, Rosie, I love this boy.
The character that we are presented with in this film of Otto Octavius is wonderful, a somewhat narcissistic scientist who is ultimately a good man. He just gets corrupted by the arms and the inhibitor chip and all that, and ultimately uses his creation that he was meant to use for good, for evil purposes, is great. His redemption arc is great, and once again, it plays into the film's theme of sacrifice. He sacrifices his big technological achievement in order to save the city and drown it in the river, and he sacrificed his life. It's wonderful. And not only that, when Alfred Molina plays Doc Ock the villain, he is just so charismatic as the villain. Like, little lines like, Butterfingers, and I see you have a train to catch. He's just so charming and villainous, and he's just a great bad guy. He's awesome. Not to mention the combination of animatronics and CGI on the tentacles are amazing. They look so good even for now. The scene in the hospital is great, but honestly, I just love it when Dr. Octopus and Spider-Man are in combat. I'll mention it a little bit later on, but oh my god, the movement is just so mwah. And now, don't get this the wrong way, the character of Dr. Octopus we get in this film is great, he works perfectly for the film, but when you hear people go, Alfred Molina is the best Dr. Octopus, I'm like, he's very good, but he's not the best representation of the character from the comics because he isn't really the character from the comics. Yes, they may share the same name, yes, they may look very similar, but at the end of the day, Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus is not as self-obsessed, narcissistic, and temperamental as comic book Dr. Octopus. There are moments of temperamentality from Alfred Molina's Doc Ock,
Getting on my nerves.
I have a knack for that.
but at the end of the day, he isn't nearly as villainous and as scheming as comic book Dr. Octopus. Like, at the end of the day, Dr. Octopus is a very evil character in the comics because he essentially wants to become, like, the kingpin of crime, in a sense. Like, he becomes the master planner and he wants to control the city and all that kind of stuff. He's a much more theatrical, villainous bad guy in the comics. In many ways, he's kind of like a Bond villain. But I mean, yeah, aside from some of the inaccuracies from the comic books, Alfred Molina is just great as Doc Ock. He is... I don't know, actually. I don't know if I like him more than Dafoe as the Green Goblin or if they're on, like, the same level. Like, they are both really great in the films, and I don't know which one I'd prefer, to be honest. And then, of course, we have the return of the iconic J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, and he is just on fire in Spider-Man 2. I love him so much in this.
You serious?
Spider-Man won't let me take any more pictures. He's turned the whole city against him. A fact I'm very proud of. He's given up, thrown in the towel. The power of the press. He's a thief. He stole my suit. I want that wall-crawling arachnid prosecuted. I want him strung up by his webs. I want Spider-Man. Perfect in every way, shape, and form. The most iconic representation of J. Jonah Jameson. He's so good. The scene again with him and Ted Raimi's character where they're talking about Dr. Octopus's name. It's just the best.
Dr. Octopus. New villain in town. Doc Ock.
And now getting on to the action in this movie. The action in this film is amazing. All the fight scenes between Spider-Man and Doc Ock, the web-swinging sequences, the fight scenes, it's amazing. The bank scene, but not even just the fight inside the bank, the scene on the outside of the bank, where Spider-Man is like fighting Doc Ock on the side of the building as Aunt May is like dangling off that statue. It's so cool, the way the camera moves, the way Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus moves, the way they're like grappling each other and then falling and then punching each other. And then of course the train sequence itself, like, oh my god, the action in this movie is god tier. Especially the train scene. I mean, just what else is there to say about the scene? I mean, the scene speaks for itself. The action, the way Spider-Man moves, the way Dr. Octopus moves, the way Spider-Man goes into the train and out the train and webs to the side of the train, and then when he gets knocked off the train and then he, webs onto the train and then, skis across the ground and then jumps back up and then swings back onto the train, it's amazing. And honestly, one of the main aspects as to why the action scenes are so great is the cinematography. Bill Pope's cinematography is beautiful. It's gorgeous. I love the way Spider-Man 2 looks. To me, it's in the top 2 best looking superhero films. I think this and Amazing Spider-Man 2 are tied with each other. It's weird though, because in some days I prefer the look of Amazing Spider-Man 2, then other days I like the look of Spider-Man 2, so I don't know. Either way, it's gorgeous. I love the pinkish hue and the color grade. I love the camera movement. I love the way it's lit. It is amazing. And speaking of amazing, Danny Elfman's score is once again amazing. I love the opening crawl for this movie, the opening credits, and I also love the opening credits for this film purely because we get the recap of Spider-Man 1 done by Alex Ross's paintings. And they are gorgeous, they just look so great, and they're so perfectly timed with the music. And that's, to me, what separates Sam Raimi from most of the comic book movie directors. He'll be like, oh yeah, famous comic cover artist Alex Ross, let's get him to do the recap at the beginning of this film. That is such a brilliant idea, and that just comes from someone who loves the source material. Oh, and speaking of music, I love the song Hold On by Jet that plays in this film. It's the song that plays over the montage where Peter gets ready to head over to MJ's play. It's a really cool song, I really like it, I love it in the film, just cinema. But overall, I love Spider-Man 2. In many ways, yes, this is the best Spider-Man film. This and Into the Spider-Verse I would class as the best. But then also, when it comes to my personal favourites, it's in my top 2, top 3, I don't know. I love all the Spider-Man movies, minus Spider-Man Far From Home. But I mean, one day I'll be like, I love The Amazing Spider-Man 2. One day I'll be like, oh no, I like Spider-Man 2. Oh no, I love Spider-Man 1. Oh no, I love The Amazing Spider-Man. So when it comes to ranking Spider-Man 2, there's 2 different ways of doing it. If you ask me what's the best Spider-Man film, I will go Spider-Man 2. If you ask me what's my favourite, I might say Spider-Man 2, I might say Amazing Spider-Man 2, I might say Amazing Spider-Man, I might say Into the Spider-Verse, I might say Spider-Man Homecoming. That is how much I love the Spider-Man films, but also that's just how much I love Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 is iconic, it is one of the greatest sequels ever made, and for good reason. Sam Raimi delivered a fantastically entertaining film with rich themes, great action, great cinematography, a complicated and sort of weird love relationship dynamic, but other than that, he translates one of my favourite Spider-Man stories onto the big screen, and for that, I love him to bits. But that is what I think of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Do you guys love it? I mean, if you don't, you should love it. It's an amazing movie. But let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media. It's all down in the description. Until we meet again, see you guys next time.